What if the smallest act of mercy could undo the cruelest twist of fate? A struggling 31-years-old ranch hand had nothing to give, not even hope for his own Davie. Two orphaned foals stood trembling in the snow, abandoned by luck and by nature, hours from freezing to death. He had every reason to walk away. He had every reason to save himself. But what he did instead, and the impossible bond that followed, would challenge everything he thought he knew about survival, about worth, and about the strange mathematics of grace. This is a story that will break your heart and rebuild it stronger. If you believe that compassion can bloom even in the hardest soil, please hit that like button and subscribe. It truly helps us share more stories like this one. The northern reaches of Montana in February are not a place for second chances. The land is stripped to its bones, a monochrome world of white snow and black timber, where the cold is not just felt but heard, a constant creak and groan of freezing wood and contracting metal. The wind comes down from Canada with a wolfish hunger, biting through layers of wool and denim as if they were tissue paper. It is a place that does not forgive mistakes. It is a place that teaches you, with brutal clarity, the difference between what you want and what you need. Davie Grady knew this difference intimately. At 31, he looked older, his face weathered by a decade of bad luck and hard labor. His hands were scarred and calloused. His back carried a permanent ache from a rodeo accident that had ended any dream of glory. And his wallet carried exactly $47, 3 weeks before payday. He worked as a hired hand at the Triple Bar Ranch, a sprawling cattle operation in the shadow of the Crazy Mountains. The work was punishing. The pay was survival wages. The bunkhouse he shared with 2 other hands was drafty and smelled of diesel and old coffee. He sent most of his money home to his younger sister in Great Falls, a single mother with 2 kids and a landlord who didn't believe in mercy. Davie believed in very little anymore, but he believed in that, in keeping his sister's lights on, and making sure his niece and nephew had something he'd never had, which was someone who didn't let them down. He was bone-tired. He was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being alone. He was holding on by his fingernails to a life that felt like it was slowly eroding beneath him. And then he found them. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of cold that made your teeth ache just breathing. Davie was riding fence line on the ranch's northern pasture, checking for breaks after a brutal weekend storm that had dumped 2 feet of heavy, wet snow. His horse, a steady bay gelding named Rusty, picked his way carefully through the drifts, his breath rising in thick plumes. The sun was a pale disk behind a veil of high clouds, offering light but no warmth. Davie's face was wrapped in a wool scarf, his eyes the only thing exposed, watering in the wind. He was thinking about nothing, which was a mercy. Just the rhythm of the horse, the creak of leather, the endless white. Then Rusty stopped, his ears swiveled forward, his body going tense beneath Davie's knees. Davie looked up, squinting. At first, he saw nothing but snow and the dark line of pines at the pasture's edge. Then movement. Something dark against the white, low to the ground. His gut tightened. Wolves had been spotted in the area. He reached instinctively for the rifle in his saddle scabbard, his cold fingers fumbling with the strap. He nudged Rusty forward. They approached slowly, the shapes resolved. Not wolves, horses, 2 small horses. No, not horses. Foals. 2 foals, barely 3 months old by the look of them, standing in a hollow where the snow had drifted against a fallen tree. They were huddled together, their small bodies pressed tight, their winter coats matted with ice and snow. One was a dark bay with a white blaze. The other was a pale dun with a black mane. They were shaking so violently Davie could see it from 20 feet away. A tremor that ran through their entire bodies like a current. And beside them, half buried in the snow, was the body of a mare. She was lying on her side, her legs stiff, her eyes glazed and empty. Dead. Frozen solid. Davie dismounted, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The cold bit at his face as he unwrapped the scarf. His breath caught. The mare had no brand. She was wild, or had been, one of the small bands of feral horses that still roamed the high country, descendants of ranch stock gone loose decades ago. She'd probably gotten separated from her band in the storm, wandered down into the valley seeking shelter, and simply given out. Hypothermia, exhaustion. The foals were too young to survive on their own. They should already be dead. Davie looked at them. They looked back. Their eyes were enormous, dark and liquid and terrified. The bay foal took a single wobbling step toward him and stopped, too weak to come closer. Its knees were trembling. The dun foal tried to nurse from its dead mother, pushing its small muzzle against the frozen mare's belly, a hopeless, heartbreaking instinct. Davie's throat tightened. He knew the math. 2 orphaned foals in February. No mare to feed them, no way to keep them warm, no money for formula or vet bills. The ranch wouldn't take them. The boss, a practical man named Dutch Carver, ran a cattle operation, not a charity. He'd tell Davie to put them down quick and clean. 1 bullet each, the merciful thing. It was the merciful thing. Davie had $47. He had a bunkhouse with a space heater that barely worked. He had a sister counting on him. He had no business taking on 2 more mouths he couldn't feed. He stood there in the snow, the wind pulling at his coat, the cold seeping through his boots. The foals stared at him. The dun foal made a sound, a thin, desperate whinny that was barely more than a squeak. It was the sound of a creature that knew it was dying and didn't understand why. Davie closed his eyes. He thought about the last time he'd asked for help and been told no. He thought about the last time he'd needed mercy and gotten none. He opened his eyes. He looked at the foals. He made a decision that made no sense, that defied every practical bone in his body, that would cost him money he didn't have and sleep he desperately needed. He was going to save them. He didn't know how. He just knew he was going to try. Davie pulled the rope from his saddle and fashioned 2 makeshift halters, slipping them gently over the foals' small heads. They were too weak to resist, too cold to care. He tied them together loosely, then secured the lead to his saddle horn. He couldn't carry them, they were too big for that, but he could lead them slowly, carefully. He mounted Rusty and began the long walk back to the ranch, the 2 foals stumbling behind him through the snow like shadows. It took 2 hours. The foals fell 3 times. Each time, Davie dismounted, his body screaming in protest, and helped them up, his hands gentle on their trembling bodies. He spoke to them quietly, a low, steady murmur of nonsense words, the way you'd talk to a frightened child. Easy now. That's it. 1 more step. Come on, little ones, just a little further. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was high and cold, and Davie's body was shaking almost as hard as the foals. He led them directly to the old equipment barn, a drafty wooden structure that housed broken tractors and rusted plows. It wasn't much, but it was out of the wind. He bedded them down in a corner on a pile of old hay, then threw every horse blanket he could find over their small bodies. They collapsed immediately, too exhausted to even stand. Davie stood over them, his mind racing. He had no plan. He had no money. He had no idea what he was doing. He walked to the main house, his boots heavy with snow, and knocked on the kitchen door. Dutch Carver answered, a broad man in his 60s with a face like weathered granite. He looked at Davie, then passed him to the equipment barn. "What did you bring in, Grady?" Dutch asked, his voice flat. "2 foals," Davie said. "Found them up on the north line." Their mama froze. "They're orphans." Dutch's expression didn't change. He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind him. The cold air swirled around them. "Put them down," Dutch said. It wasn't cruel, it was just fact. "We're not running a rescue operation. They won't make it anyway." "I know," Davie said, "but I want to try." Dutch stared at him. "With what money, Grady? You planning to buy formula? You planning to pay a vet? You planning to feed them every 2 hours for the next 3 months?" Davie's jaw tightened. "I'll figure it out." Dutch shook his head. "You're a good hand, Davie. You work hard. Don't make me regret keeping you on. Those foals are a distraction we can't afford. They die on their own. That's nature. You drag it out, that's cruelty." Davie met his gaze. He felt something hard and stubborn rising in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll do it on my own time. I won't let it interfere with my work." Dutch looked at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound of deep exasperation. "You got 1 week, Grady. If they're still alive and still a problem, you deal with it. Understand?" Davie nodded. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Dutch muttered, turning back to the house. "Thank yourself when you're broke and exhausted, and those foals are still dead." Davie spent his last $47 at the feed store in town that afternoon, buying 2 bottles, a bag of powdered mare's milk replacer, and a small heating lamp. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at the supplies and then at Davie. "Orphaned foals?" she asked. Davie nodded. "Good luck," she said softly. "You're going to need it." That night, Davie moved into the equipment barn. He dragged his sleeping bag from the bunkhouse, set up a cot near the foals, and hung the heating lamp above their makeshift pen. The temperature inside the barn was barely above freezing, but it was better than outside. The foals lay curled together, their breathing shallow and rapid. Davie mixed the formula according to the directions, warming it with hot water from a thermos. He'd never bottle-fed anything in his life. He knelt beside the bay foal, the one with the white blaze, and gently coaxed its mouth open. The foal resisted weakly, its head lolling. Davie dipped his finger in the warm formula and rubbed it on the foal's gums. The foal's tongue moved, its eyes flickered. Davie slipped the nipple into its mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the foal's instinct kicked in. It began to suck, weakly at first, then with more strength. The warm milk flowed. Davie felt something break open in his chest, a feeling so overwhelming it scared him. The foal drank half the bottle before its head dropped, exhausted. Davie moved to the dun foal. This one was weaker, its breathing more labored. It took longer to respond, but eventually it drank too, just a few ounces before falling back into a deep, twitching sleep. Davie sat on the cold, concrete floor, his back against a tractor tire, and watched them breathe. He set an alarm on his phone for 2 hours. The first week was a battle of attrition fought in 2-hour increments. Davie fed the foals every 2 hours, around the clock, stumbling out of sleep that felt more like unconsciousness. He worked his regular shifts on the ranch during the day, his body moving on autopilot, his mind fogged with exhaustion. He fell asleep standing up twice, once while mending fence and once while mucking out stalls. The other hands noticed. "You look like death," one of them said, not unkindly. Davie just nodded. The foals improved slowly. By the third day, they could stand without trembling. By the fifth day, they began to move around the pen, exploring with the tentative curiosity of creatures realizing they might survive. Davie named them quietly, to himself, though he knew better than to get attached. The bay with the white blaze became Polly, for the small spark of defiance in her eyes. The dun with the black mane became Ash, for the color of smoke and quiet things. On the seventh day, Dutch came to inspect. He stood at the door of the equipment barn, his arms crossed, watching Davie coax Polly to drink from the bottle. The foal was stronger now, pushing at the bottle with her nose, her small tail flicking. "They're alive," Dutch said. Davie looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face gaunt. "They are." Dutch nodded slowly. "All right, Grady, you won that round, but they're your responsibility. They cost the ranch anything, they're gone." "Understood." Davie nodded. He understood. Dutch turned to leave, then paused. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Davie. "What's this?" Davie asked. Dutch's expression softened just slightly. "A woman in town. She runs a horse rescue. She heard about what you're doing. She said if you need advice or supplies, call her. She might help." Davie looked at the paper. A name and a phone number were written in careful script. "Why would she help me?" Davie asked. Dutch shrugged. "Maybe she's crazy like you." The woman's name was Helen Porter, and she wasn't crazy. She was 72 years old, a former large animal veterinarian who'd retired to run a small sanctuary for unwanted and abused horses. Her ranch was 15 miles outside of town, a patchwork of weathered corrals and modest barns that housed 23 horses, each one with a story of survival. When Davie called her, his voice shaken with exhaustion, she listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Bring them to me. I'll show you what to do." Davie borrowed Dutch's truck the following Sunday, loaded the foals carefully into a stock trailer, and made the drive. Helen met him at the gate, a small woman with white hair pulled back in a braid, and eyes that missed nothing. She examined the foals with practiced hands, checking their gums, their heartbeat, their body condition. "You did good," she said finally. "They should be dead." Davie felt something loosen in his chest. He hadn't realized how much he'd needed to hear that. Helen taught him everything. How to transition the foals from bottle to bucket feeding. How to watch for signs of colic or pneumonia. How to handle their small hooves, preparing them for the farrier. How to teach them boundaries and respect without breaking their spirit. She gave him supplies, blankets, supplements, grain, all at cost or donated outright. She introduced him to a network of people who cared about horses the way he was beginning to. People who understood that saving a life wasn't about logic or profit. It was about something deeper. Over the following weeks, Davie fell into a new rhythm. He still worked the ranch, still sent money to his sister. But his world now revolved around two growing foals who greeted him each morning with soft knickers and curious noses. He was still exhausted, still broke, but he was no longer empty. Winter loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly. The snow receded in patches, revealing the brown earth beneath. The days grew longer, the foals grew stronger. Polly became bold and playful, charging around the small pen, bucking at nothing, her white blaze flashing. Ash remained quieter, more thoughtful, but his eyes lost their haunted look. He began to trust. One evening in late March, as Davie was brushing Polly's winter coat, Dutch appeared at the barn door. He watched in silence for a moment. "You've done something here, Grady," Dutch said finally. Davie looked up, brush in hand. "Sir?" "Those foals," Dutch said. "They're sound. They're healthy. You brought them back from nothing." Davie didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Dutch shifted his weight. "I've been thinking. We could use a couple more horses on the ranch. Young ones we can train up right. If you're willing to put in the work, I'll pay for their keep. You can start them under saddle when they're old enough." Davie's heart kicked against his ribs. "You mean?" "Keep them," Dutch said. "Train them. They're ranch horses now. Yours and ours." Davie's throat closed. He couldn't speak. Dutch nodded as if that settled it. He turned to leave, then stopped. "And Grady? You did good. Real good." That night, Davie sat on the cot in the equipment barn, now comfortably heated, watching Polly and Ash sleep. They were curled together as they always were, their bodies rising and falling in synchronized breaths. He thought about the morning he'd found them, trembling in the snow beside their dead mother. He thought about the decision he'd made, the one that defied logic and sense. He thought about how close he'd come to walking away. Spring arrived in a rush of color and sound. The meadows turned green. Wildflowers exploded in riotous purples and yellows. The air smelled of sage and new grass. Polly and Ash were turned out into a small pasture, their first taste of real freedom. They ran. They ran like creatures possessed, their legs churning, their manes flying, their young bodies testing the limits of speed and joy. Davie leaned on the fence and watched, a rare smile breaking across his weathered face. Helen came to visit often. She brought other people from the rescue network, trainers and farriers, and quiet horse people who saw potential in the two young horses. They offered advice, encouragement, and something Davie hadn't expected, which was friendship. He realized he'd spent so long being alone that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something, to be seen and valued. In May, his sister called. She'd gotten a promotion at work. She was moving into a better apartment. She was crying on the phone, happy tears. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Davie stood outside the barn, the phone pressed to his ear, and looked at Polly and Ash grazing peacefully in the pasture. "I didn't give up," he said quietly. "I just learned that sometimes you have to save something else before you can save yourself." By summer, the foals were yearlings, gangly and awkward in the way of adolescent horses, all legs and curiosity. Davie began their training in earnest, working with them daily, teaching them to lead, to lunge, to accept a saddle pad on their backs. Polly was fearless, eager to try new things. Ash was cautious but willing, building confidence slowly. Davie discovered he had a gift for this work, a patience and intuition he hadn't known he possessed. Dutch noticed. Other ranchers noticed. Word spread. One afternoon in August, a man Davie didn't know pulled up to the ranch in a diesel truck, pulling an expensive horse trailer. He introduced himself as a trainer from a cutting horse operation 2 counties over. He'd heard about the orphaned foals, about the ranch hand who'd saved them. "I'm looking for young prospects," the man said. "Horses with good minds and good bone. I heard yours might fit the bill." Davie felt a cold spike of fear. "He's not interested in selling," Dutch said, appearing beside Davie. The trainer nodded slowly, looking at Polly and Ash in the pasture. He pulled out a business card. "If you ever change your mind," he said, "those are quality animals. You did something special there." After the man left, Dutch turned to Davie. "You could have made good money," he said. Davie shook his head. They're not for sale. Good, Dutch said, because I've been thinking. We should start a breeding program, small scale, quality horses. You'd run it. Davie stared at him. Me? You've got the touch, Dutch said. And more than that, you've got the heart. Those foals are proof. What do you say? Davie looked at the pasture, at Polly and Ash grazing in the golden afternoon light. He thought about the man he'd been 9 months ago, broke and broken, holding on by sheer stubbornness. He thought about the decision he'd made in the snow, the one that had made no sense. I say yes, Davie said. The breeding program started small. 2 mares purchased at auction, both gentle and proven. A modest barn converted into foaling stalls. Helen helped with the planning, connecting Davie with veterinarians and geneticists. The rescue network rallied, offering equipment and expertise. Davie discovered a passion he hadn't known existed, a calling that felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. Polly and Ash turned 3. They were started under saddle, and both proved to be exceptional. Polly became a ranch horse with flash and talent, quick-footed and bold. Ash became Davie's personal mount, steady and wise beyond his years, the kind of horse you could trust with your life. They were inseparable still, calling to each other across the pasture if separated, sleeping side by side in the barn. They rem-pollied, Davie thought. They rem-pollied being cold and alone and frightened, and they decided that together was the only way that made sense. One winter morning, nearly 2 years after he'd found them, Davie rode Ash up to the north pasture, the place where it had all begun. Snow covered the ground again, fresh and white and clean. The fallen tree was still there, half buried. Davie dismounted and stood in the cold, his breath fogging the air. He thought about the mare lying frozen in the snow. He thought about the 2 trembling foals who should have died. He thought about the improbable chain of events that had led from that moment to this one, from despair to purpose. Ash nudged him gently, his warm breath on Davie's neck. Davie ran his hand along the horse's shoulder, feeling the solid muscle, the steady heartbeat. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't know if he was talking to the horse, to the mare who'd given her life trying to save her babies, or to something larger, some strange grace that had put him in that place at that moment, with just enough foolishness in his heart to try the impossible. He rode back to the ranch as the sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow to diamonds. Ahead, the barns and corrals of the Triple Bar spread across the valley, smoke rising from the chimneys, horses moving in the pastures. It was home. It was purpose. It was proof that sometimes the smallest act of mercy can undo the cruelest twist of fate, not just for the ones you save, but for the one doing the saving. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to rem-polly that compassion is never wasted, that grace appears in the strangest places, and that sometimes the thing you save ends up saving you right back.